is that the more populated nations, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now, could potentially have a lot more power. They're going to have, economically, they're going to have more consumers. Economically, they're going to have more producers. Military-wise, they're going to have more, and again, we kind of squashed this a little bit earlier, but they're going to have a larger military. And just, that's a force. It's a force to be reckoned with.
Watch and or listen while we tackle tough and sometimes taboo topics filmed live over drinks. This platform allows us to articulate our thoughts and challenge our beliefs. This is SipTalk. Grab a drink and enjoy.
And we're live. Welcome to SipTalk, episode 280. My name is Justin DiGiulio, joined by James, the Bosnator Boswell, philosopher, philanthropist, philatelist, phlebotomist. I'm out at PH words. Sorry. Flamingo. I should have PH words, FL words. I should have them in my mind, but we just had an awkward start. So this is actually our second shot at getting this podcast underway, because today we are talking about the impending population collapse, which is really something fascinating. We've alluded to this topic a couple of times, but I think this is it's about time we're hitting this one head on. But it is a scary, scary topic. So with that,
it's not scary to be at all.
With that being said, I'm going to pour myself a drink. James, what are you drinking down there in not so sunny South Carolina?
I got some PBR and some diet whiskey.
Nice. So what's diet whiskey?
Yeah.
So you have a glass of whiskey and then a glass of water?
No, it's mixed.
So I actually had a nice frozen Guinness glass from the Guinness factory in Dublin, and by the time we got started, it stopped being frozen. It just kind of thawed out. So it's a cool glass, but we will pour this nice can of Guinness in here and get started with the podcast. So you want to explain how we got onto this particular topic for this episode? Because I know that you kind of pushed for this as a topic, and I didn't.
Well,
you didn't have to push very hard.
Push for it. I think it was just a discussion that started and made me realize there's enough for us to talk about. I stumbled on the documentary Birth Gap, which is analyzing like falling birth rates across the world, and the documentary is pretty open about having a very slanted take on the issue, in that the person who made the film thinks that it's a really major problem and that people need to be having more babies. And I was watching it because I thought it was an interesting story. And I started throwing some texts out between you and Rush, and the response that I got from you guys was like, all right, I think there's enough for us to talk about this on the cast.
Which reminds me, right now we're recording this live. We have Rash Galeb, co-producer of the SipTalk podcast, and he is feeding us your live comments. If you're watching us live on X or Twitter, you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, we can see your comments. If you're watching on TikTok, well, we don't see your comments on that platform. You got to go to one of the other platforms. We're also on Instagram live, too, through the computer. So fun times. Now, when I think about population collapse, I've been hearing for a couple of years, I forget who it is that says, who's been saying basically that Earth's population is going to reach about 10 billion and then sharply decline. And it feels like we're actually on trend for that, especially after looking at some of the data. But the way that I look at it is, and we're going to get into some of the data or get into some of the causes. But if you look at kind of the replacement rate, meaning a couple has 2 children and you have replacement, which actually has to be a little higher than 2 children because you account for
accidents and
things like that. But most of the industrialized nations, which is the majority of them, I think,
are well below 2.1.
They're close. So a lot of them are closer to 1, which basically means in a generation, the population, not a generation. Well, we can talk about how it plays out over time, but the replacement rate is 1/2 basically. Meaning that a couple produces 1 child, so that in whatever series of events, then you have half the population
over a long enough period of time.
And it was an interesting documentary. I think I started watching this YouTube video you sent me, thinking I'd be watching like a 3-minute video or max like a 40-minute video. It was like an hour and 37 minutes or something, but it was an interesting video. And I listened to I got a long commute, so I listened to a lot of long YouTube videos. Did you mention the title of the video? case somebody wants to.
The name of the documentary is Birth Gap, and it's worth a watch, but I think it's really flawed in a bunch of different areas.
So I want to get into. Well, what do you think? You want to address that video first, that
No,
documentary first, or
I
can we
want
kind
to.
of get into it so people understand some of the metrics that we're talking about? And
Well, I want to ask a couple questions that we're going to then address, which is like, is the population declining? Like, where and where not? Is the population decline like really a problem? Um, why are people so hesitant to have kids today compared to the past? And if we're to agree that it's a problem, what changes need to be made to society for countries to kind of reverse this trend and talk about some of the good and some of the bad ideas that have been suggested?
so let's just talk about how you and I kind of are opposed on this issue. You're a no kidder, right? You don't want kids, no kidding. And I'd like to have like 7 kids, right? I think that's great. Now, resources is a problem. Time and resources, time, money, and other resources are preventing me from having a farm full of kids. But I like the idea of having lots of kids, and that's not accounting for population, overflow and things like that. You want no kids because you don't want the responsibility, among some other reasons. But most people. So, what do you think is the reason for the declining population rate?
Um, the movie Birth Cap, I think, accurately pins one of the reasons, where it talks about how like there was an if you look at Japan, for example, which is frequently talked about for their low birth rate.
So they hypothesize a lot of different reasons, but some of the
Yeah,
main
but
ones.
one of the main ones, and I think this is the strongest argument of the film, was they look at Japan in like 1974, and like in the 1970s when oil prices went through a whole bunch of shocks. Japan is particularly sensitive to that because they have to import all of their oil. So all of a sudden, a lot of stuff in Japan became much more expensive pretty suddenly, and
Because
economically,
the economy runs on oil, right?
it
To move
probably
goods
more in
around.
the 70s than it does today.
Yeah.
So the Japan's economy took a real hit because everything went up in price. And what the author of the documentary found was like, if you trace like when that oil shock hit, you see 9 months later, you see a tremendous decline in births. And to me, that's a rational economic decision being made by the population of Japan, saying kids are expensive. We're having trouble affording things right now. So that's an easy thing for us to cut back on, is having to pay to raise a child.
So Japan's replacement rate right now is less than 1.3, which is probably one of the lowest of the countries. How do we want to classify countries? We want it
I would say
like third world or developing nation versus post industrialized.
I would say like developed versus developing would probably be the easiest way to look at it. And so Japan is a developed economy. They're a developed country. And if you look
And
at
go ahead.
most developed nations, they have like their birth rate are all well below 2.
So
United
I got
States is at 1.6.
so you get Japan
Japan's at like
1.3,
1.2 or 1.2, 1.3.
Germany 1.4, 1.5, Italy 1.2 to 1.4, Spain 1.3, South Korea zero point 0.8. And then some countries, you get some countries that are above 2.
Not many. Like most of the countries that are above 2 would be classified as developing. So look at like pretty much all the poor countries in Africa.
Okay, I mean I gave you some here on the list.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Actually, these aren't developing countries that I've given you. Actually, the countries that I've given you are developed
Oh,
countries,
well, I mean, you've got Israel, which is a developed country, and they're one of the few countries that have a high birth rate at 2.8.
which is very high.
And
Yeah.
you could probably say that a lot of it has to do with like their unusually high religiosity for a developed nation, where
So
their population is extremely religious
very
compared to
religious.
to other countries of similar
Exactly.
size and like economic makeup.
Yeah. So let me just and I want people who are listening to us to think about if you're 40 years or younger, how many siblings you have, or say 45 years or younger, how many siblings. My guess is most people are three or less. And then you look at your parents, and both of my parents had three siblings, so there was four altogether, so that's eight. And then above them, some of those grandparents had like eight or nine siblings. So, and above them, it basically, there was a lot of infant mortality. People used to, back in the day, have children basically. Also, they didn't have access to birth control the same
Well,
way
you
that we
think
do
about like
now.
during like the 1700 and 1800s, where like some women would have like 15 or 20 kids, and like 7 or 8 of them would survive,
Well, I
or
mean,
like
from
a
the
woman would
moment,
have kids until basically she died in childbirth.
well, I mean, from the moment you became fertile, you had some 30-year-old, you're 14 years old, you had some 30 year
Yeah,
old, trying to have sex with you without protection.
and
So
to the people, to the pro-natalists out there, I would say that's not what we should be wanted to go back to, and some of them it feels like that's what they do want to go
I
back to.
think like Elon Musk would like that.
Oh yeah,
So, and he has an interesting take on population decline. All right,
shockingly, it's wrong.
but I mean that's kind of where we are right now. If you just take the simple math, most countries have a negative replacement rate, meaning the population is set up in the next generation or two to take a steep decline.
Yep.
And there's a lot of different reasons. What the documentary talks about quite a bit is economic pressure on families and costs. Right back in the
Which I
1950s,
think is a major one.
I mean, yeah, but back in the 1950s, you could have a full-time job making, I don't know, single digit thousands of dollars a year, and own a home and own a vehicle, and your spouse didn't have to work, and you could have three or four kids and get by.
And yeah, and
Um,
like take a vacation or two every year and have like
exactly.
decent things in the house. Like you could have one person working, supporting a wife and 2 or 3 kids, and they wouldn't be economically pressured.
Whereas now you have both adults in a relationship working full-time jobs, some of them working more than one job, and they don't live necessarily in luxury. Although I guess if you compared it to their 1950 counterparts, having several flat screen TVs and two vehicles and X, Y, and Z is. But
Yeah,
point
but
is, they don't live
it's
in.
comparative.
But they don't live in obscene luxury. Okay, they live pretty regularly for the year that we're in, and they can't afford to have a child. A lot of these people living paycheck to paycheck. So the idea of adding another $20,000 a year in childcare and then additional food and clothes, it can get pretty expensive pretty quick.
Well, you can look at things like what is housing, like the housing costs as a ratio to average income. You can look at education costs as a ratio to average income. You can look at like wages that you can earn without having a college degree and see that like having a college degree of some sort is basically a requirement to be middle class these days, and that's expensive.
The cost of
And
healthcare.
cost of healthcare, oh yeah.
But
And
also
so
childcare. So how it's really difficult to have a job when school for children starts at 8:30 in the morning or so, and then ends at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Like you have to be left for work already at 8:30 in the morning, and you have to be you got to work until 5 or something like that. So a lot of schools and preschools and kindergartens or half day kindergartens aren't very conducive to even having a job.
well, yeah, because even if you have a child that's like of school age, so let's say 4 or 5, like, and they get out of school at 3 or 4, and you work until 5 or 6, like, you still have to pay for a couple hours of childcare, and that's not to talk about like childcare for the ages of 0 to let's say 4,
So
where like they can't go to school.
So, do you think people might be, and I think this is kind of after what we're talking about right now, but do you think people might be more selfish now? Like they're like, I'm living a good life. I don't need to add another responsibility into my life.
I mean, that's one way to look at it, and that's how I would characterize some of my take on it, which is like having a kid by definition requires sacrifice. Like, unless you're going to do it wrong, in which case, like, you don't have to be responsible at all, but then you're a terrible parent. So, if you want to be even a remotely decent parent, you have to make a lot of sacrifices. And to me, I just look at kids don't provide any reward to me that is remotely commensurate with the sacrifice involved.
Do
And
you
I think
remember?
a lot of people think that way.
Do you remember the podcast episode we did? It's actually one of the more popular ones, and we've done a few reruns of it. Actually, is sex in Japan and how Japanese people are just not having sex.
Well, that's I mean, we talked about that a lot, and I mean, basically, it's a cultural thing there too, where the work culture is so oppressive, and the society is so regimented and strict that forming social bonds there is more difficult than it is in other countries, and so naturally, that makes finding a romantic partner more difficult because being social is more difficult. And also, so many people, especially young people that would be trying to find relationships, are kind of at the entry level portion of their careers where they might be working 80 or 100 hours. And if you're working 80 or 100 hours in a week, I
In
don't care who
Japan,
you are.
that's not abnormal.
No, it isn't. And I don't care who you are. If you're working that many hours per week, you're not going to have the time or energy to find a relationship.
But also, marriage rates and relationships are fewer and further to come by in Japan. And across the rest of the world, marriage ages are skewing higher, if any at all. Divorce
Yeah.
rates are up. These things work against having families, and that works against
Yeah, so let's get
having
back to that
children.
because I want to talk about, first of all, do you think that like this the negative birth rates in a lot of countries, do you think that's a problem?
I think, yeah, I do think it's going to become a problem. I think it's going to become a problem when it comes to like the entire industry of building homes and developing is going to basically disappear. I mean, it's going to still exist because we're going to need new buildings and maintenance on buildings, but we're building at a very rapid rate across the United States. Um,
Well, that's because we still have immigration.
well,
Immigration's
I mean,
filling the
well,
gap.
exactly. Are we trying to stick to our our outline here?
Well, I mean,
Well, let's hold on. Let's just get into the urbanization effect because I think what were and let's get through this real quick. Just so we stay on track because we got a lot of good stuff to talk about, and I think what you're saying is something I want to delve into, but I don't want to kind of miss on the causes here. Urbanization effect, basically, people who live in cities live in now. City living is at an all-time high. Population density is highest in the cities. People live in small apartments with very high cost of living. Um, that's certainly something that's going to affect whether or not people are having children.
yeah, the less money and less space you have, the less it makes sense to have a kid, even if you want one.
So, and then uh, there's a note here about towns in parts of Europe that are abandoned because people just aren't having children in these rural areas.
Well, yeah,
Uh,
you've got. I mean, it's not just that people aren't having children there. It's because so many of the economic opportunities have moved away from the small towns. So unless you're farming or doing some kind of like artisanal thing that you can ship worldwide, like all the jobs and all the economic opportunity is centered around cities. So even the children that are born in these small towns often move out because there's not much to do there, and so they pursue opportunities at universities, and then those universities end up sending them to jobs in big cities, and so everyone clusters in the big cities because that's where the work is.
well, you see a lot, and I have a lot of Dominican friends and family that grow up in small towns, but as soon as they're old enough, they're just like, yeah, I'm out of here. And then that town is left with a shortage in the labor market. You have an aging population, and nobody in their 20s and 30s is living there because they all leave when they're 18 or around 18 and then have children somewhere else and choose to raise the children somewhere else that's more affluent with more resources. And then you see
I mean,
the
why would you move back to a town where there's nothing to do and no work to be done?
exactly. But what happens is those smaller towns, the schools and the hospitals disappear. They have to shut down.
I look at this as economic natural selection.
And give me more context to your statement because I probably agree with you.
If you have a small town and you don't do anything to make its economy or other aspects of it appealing to people to live in, then you're going to die out. And that's just natural selection. It's
Well,
the
look at
world has changed, and if you can't or refuse to adapt to the way that the world works now, then you're going to suffer.
Well,
And
look at the city of Troy, which is nearby where we grew up, which when we grew up was not the place to ever be. It was arguably a dangerous place. It was dreary. Everything was falling apart. And now, if you go back, they have one of the biggest farmers markets that I've ever seen, bigger than like the big one in Union Square in New York City. And it's a vibrant place. The nightlife is wild. There's some new construction buildings. The older buildings are being taken very well care of. But that's like a blip on the map. Most cities like that,
well,
or I mean, and that's a
I mean,
city,
you
but
can look
most
at other
places like
cities
that
like
are.
that. You can look at Detroit and how like they've done degrowth, and like Detroit has decided to basically just let parts of the city burn and just go untended and concentrate on the areas where people still do live. And like Detroit's downtown is actually pretty good now, and you can find other examples
But
of
these
this
are also
of cities
cities.
that are
These are
adapting.
cities, and they're being,
Cities, Troy's a city.
but a lot of these people in these cities are not having children.
Yeah.
So, and what we were talking about was
Huh.
smaller towns, and then we got into cities. But we're talking about revitalizing cities. But you're talking about economic and geographical
Yeah, but
selection.
I just want to go back to the question that I asked you, which is, do you think that this is a problem for the countries that have negative birth rates?
Well, not now, and I don't actually think we're seeing any effect of it yet. But I do think it's something that's going to catch up with us very quickly.
So I would actually agree that it is a problem, because you need, uh, unless unless all of these countries change the structure of their society in terms of how they take care of old people and how they like handle old people in retirement with state pension plans and everything else, like all of those are structured on having a certain ratio of people working to people that are retired, and those ratios are rapidly changing away from more workers and towards more retired people. And
Hmm.
so these countries, if they're going to try and support these older populations while the younger people are not having children, then roughly speaking, they have one of two choices. The first is to restructure the way that they do pension plans and take care of old people. And two is if they're not able to get like their citizens to have more children, then they're going to need to start allowing more immigrants in and allowing people from other countries to pursue economic
I
opportunities
feel
from
like you're turning
those
this
countries.
into like the liberal agenda, though. Like,
No,
let's
no,
all
no, no, no. This is
let me hit a couple things because I want to still just wrap up on a couple
well,
of
because
cause
I want to
issues.
say
You want to start talking about effects real quick. So let
no, no,
me.
no. I just want to say this is why I think it is a problem, and the reason why I didn't say, well, the people in those countries could just start having more babies is we'll get to that, but basically every measure that any country has tried to raise its own birth rate through like policies and incentives has failed.
Well, hang on. We'll get to potential solutions. You're on
Yeah.
effects right now. I'm still on causes. I want
Okay.
to talk about gender equality.
Okay.
And now that you
Causes.
have well, yeah, causes. Now you have more women who are in the workforce.
Yep.
Okay, and uh, it's a very difficult thing as a woman to step away from work for kind of a minimum of 3 months, right? By the way, the 9 months leading up to that increasingly become more difficult, and then you're taking a month off minimum if you're a fucking like Wonder Woman, Superman type woman. But you're probably talking about 3 months off, which is a big setback. And then getting back into a job is very difficult.
And
Uh,
oftentimes, even when you come back from those 3 months, like the
you,
next 3 to 9 months are going to be
hell,
like,
you're
well,
catching up. You're behind. You're
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 catching up, you're behind, but
hormonal.
it's also likely that you're probably working some form of reduced hours.
Yeah. Um, which makes it tough. And you were talking about some potential solutions that governments and companies have tried to put into play, but we'll get there in a
We'll
minute.
get there.
Uh,
So I want to talk a little bit more about this because I think it's actually a really key point because you can look at as women have gained independence, they have increasingly chosen to have less and less children. Would you agree?
well, as education rates go up, as yeah, I mean, there's lots of correlatory lines that we could draw here. But yeah,
Yeah, and
I think that's a big one. I think it's a causatory line. But go ahead.
right. So if you think about this from a woman's perspective, right? So being pregnant sucks. Carrying a baby is really, really hard. It wrecks your body. it wrecks your life experience for like 8 to 9 months because like you just don't feel good. And then you've got like a month or so or more of physical recovery from the pregnancy. And now you are, even though once the baby is born, in theory, the man can do as much or more than the woman as far as childcare goes. In reality, especially early on, women are the ones who are doing the majority of the childcare. And so you can look at it and say, like, I'm doing all this work and suffering all of these consequences. And a lot of women are just saying, why?
I agree with
And for the
everything you
longest
said. I
time,
agree with everything that you said, except for when you said it wrecks the body. I just want to say, women, it doesn't wreck
no,
the body. It
I'm
doesn't
not
number, it
talking
doesn't
about.
number on the body, but
I'm not talking about in
I've
terms of
seen some.
attractiveness. What I'm talking about is like it does damage to the body.
It
It
does.
like
It does. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Uh, it's a huge endeavor. It's a huge endeavor, and given that women are now more than ever not just baby making machines and key players in our economy and culture, et cetera, uh, they get to make that choice whether or not they want to have children or if they want to do other things. And for many years, it wasn't really a choice. It was you make babies or do nothing,
yeah.
right? And now when you have options and making babies and do it. So before it was two options: do nothing, make babies. Okay,
Yeah.
and now it's you could do. You could be a fucking fighter pilot. You could be a comedian. You could be a CEO. You could, whatever. You'd be an accountant. For whatever, or make babies. And doing nothing really isn't an option. So because
Right.
we all need to work to make money these days.
So like it's as soon as women get similar opportunities to the ones that men have, they start making choices that weren't historically available to them. Like, I'm going to be independent, or I'm going to pursue a career, or instead of spending the next 20 years of my life having 3 or 4 or 5 kids and that being my life, I'll have one. And that might take me 3 or 4 years of kind of like sidelining, and then I'll be
Yeah.
back to it. It's, it's I'm either not going to take a break from the life that I want to live, or I'm going to take a much shorter one than women had to in the past.
Okay, so real quick, I just want to bring up the last one: ultra liberal reason people not having children because of climate change, or they're worried that the life. And this isn't super liberal, actually. It's a little bit woke,
Well,
but what I was going to say is that people are afraid to have children because bringing new humans into a world that will be lousier than it is today, and that's their concern. I understand that a little bit. I do think it's a little bit woke. And then
what I want to go along with that.
and then one more thing though is the birth strike movement against overpopulation, which I think per this argument we're making now is not going to be an issue in the long run. And then
No,
carbon emissions. We're going to have more carbon making machines. We're going to destroy the environment. The
yeah,
more humans we make, the worse the environment's going to be.
I buy those arguments the least. But what I will say is, like, I think the two key drivers for someone who might be interested in having a kid, or is at least open to it, the two things that they need to have before they decide that they're going to have a kid is that they need to have economic security, and they need to have optimism for the future.
Well, here's the thing that I see is everybody wants to have this kind of security and be in a perfect place in their life to have children. And then you ask anybody who's had children, they're like, "Oh, I'm so glad that I did it. I wasn't ready for it, but it's the best thing that's ever happened to me." Not everybody says that, but I do hear that a lot.
I mean, I could think about the captain on my pool team, who has a daughter that's probably about 5 years old. And this was when I was very early to the team, so they didn't know me very well. And like, I invited him over to my house to like play pool, and he's like, "Sorry, I have to take care of my daughter this weekend." And like, the conversation morphed into wanting to have kids or whatever. And I was just like, I don't ever want to have it. And then somebody on the team asked the captain of my team, like, "Oh, would you like, are you happy you had your daughter?" And he's like, "I wouldn't do it again."
He's divorced.
Yeah, he's
Yeah, because I heard you say he had his kids this weekend. Look, before we get into the next thing, I want to answer last week's bar trivia question because it was a good one. I think you enjoyed this one. You got it actually, and then if you
I
stay
had to
tuned,
explore around the edges of it to make sure that there
well,
wasn't like.
that's how these brain teasers tend to work. So I'll give it to you. Jed climbed the castle stairs to his ultra private bathroom. This is a high floor bathroom, right? With a view? No, without a view. This is a windowless bathroom on a high floor. It was constructed of concrete blocks and stone, and it was sealed. As Jed closed the large door, he heard the outside latch fall shut, locking him inside of his airtight bathroom. Without considering the possibilities, Jed turned on the tap, decided to take a bath, and think about how he was going to get out. However, when the bathtub was full, Jed went to turn the water off, and the water did not turn off. The taps were stripped. The water continued to flow. Jed was not only locked in, but he could not turn off the water in his airtight room. Since the room was not just airtight, it was also watertight, and the water was beginning to flow onto the floor outside of the bathtub, he knew that this room could effectively drown him very slowly, but it would be a painful, sad death. What could he do to keep himself from drowning? James?
Pull the drain plug.
Pull the drain plug. Jed could just pull the drain plug, and he would have bought himself enough time to chisel his way out of that bathroom.
Yep.
Pull the drain plug. Don't forget, there's always a way out. Well, not out, but that was a way to not drown, at least in this scenario. Stay tuned to the end of the podcast. I got another fun bar trivia question. It has to do with photography and wind and animals, sunshine. It's a good bar trivia question. All right, so let's talk about some consequences, because this is kind of what puts us in peril in the long term. Okay, consequences of low birth rates where the population actually does decline. Everybody's worried about overpopulation, but if our population starts to take a steep decline, which is kind of what the data is saying it's going to do, wouldn't you agree? The data says it's going to kind of take a sharp decline. Like our generation is kind of like the pivot point.
Assuming no future interference, then possibly.
So, but what happens if you have fewer young people being born, and then you have an aging population? So you have a lesser workforce.
If everything holds to the current trend, then yes.
And so, how does that affect like Social Security?
Oh well, do you expect to be drawing a Social Security check in 25 years?
I do actually.
I don't.
I'm oddly optimistic about Social Security.
I don't.
I think they'll find some other way to fund it. But if you're 65 years old or whatever the year, I think it's 67 now, and you paid into it your whole life, but there are fewer people paying into it now, how exactly do you plan to extract dollars from something that has fewer dollars going into it?
Well, it's a legal requirement, so the government's going to pay that money no matter
Well,
what. It's really a question of whether it's funded and how it's funded.
how it's funded, exactly. Yeah.
So, like, I would say that the likelihood that Social Security looks the same in 25 years as it does today is virtually zero. Like,
So,
there's going to be massive changes to the way that the program works in
and
order
well,
for it to
yeah,
continue.
and that's kind of one closed circuit economy, right?
Yeah,
People work, they
lots
pay
of other
into it.
countries have similar.
Systems that derive the income to the program in different ways, though. What about other effects on the economy? What do you think? What else is going to happen in the economy? I told you about housing.
Well, education is going to see lower demand.
Well, you're going to have fewer young people, and
You're
you're
going to
going
have
to have,
fewer students.
when you get a small town or a suburban area that the school has just enough people to make money and just enough taxpayers to pay into it, but then you have fewer children and then fewer prime working taxpayers, and you have an aging population in that town. They're going to have to shut down and combine schools with the next nearby town.
Real quick, there's a question from the chat. A guy named Kuresh asks me, "How can you keep a language or even a culture alive if a country does not encourage families to have children?" And I presume that's kind of an indictment of like immigration systems, of saying like if you're relying on immigrants to supply your population, how do you keep your culture or language alive? And the answer to that is simple: is you make a requirement of naturalization or citizenship of your country based on like civics test and education and language. And so that if people want to be part of your country as part of the process of joining, they have to learn about that kind of stuff. And I can think about like I was on vacation in Spain 2 years ago, and I met a woman who was from Britain that was working the front desk at a bird sanctuary, and she grew up in Britain and moved to the Basque Country in Spain and spoke fluent Basque, which is a language that you would never learn in England, but she learned Spanish and she learned Basque because she married into the area. And like you can assimilate into a culture if you want to move there. Anyone can do it.
I think you're overreading into the question. The question is, how do you keep a language or a culture alive if the country doesn't encourage people to have children? So basically, how does a country stay alive if they don't encourage people to have children? Was the question. How does a country stay alive? What you're saying is a place like the United States. What you're again,
I'm saying this for any country.
you've
It's
taken
not just the United
a
States.
liberal leaning answer, basically talking about pro immigration, saying, hey, if we're going to let everybody from Mexico and the rest of the world and come to the United States, how do we keep our culture alive? Which is a funny question because American culture is an international
Well,
melting pot of
but
culture.
the answer is
But
true of any country. It's
but let's
whether it's
say, but yeah,
Australia or
but let's
Japan
but
or Italy.
let's say we are Italy, and the example that you gave, is a better example. Um, you overread into the question, and you gave a very good example, is that if you're going to have people come to your country, then you have nationalization requirements. So they learn the language, they learn the history, they pass tests to become citizens. That's the answer.
Yeah.
All right, we talked about economy, housing market. In places that are growing in population, you have to continue to build housing, which I always think is a funny thing in New York City, how they're always saying, hey, we have a shortage of housing, but actually the population census to census declined by like 500,000 people in the last census, which I said, oh, well, they're just obviously not counting the immigrants and the minorities as they should. And knowing people who actually work for the census, like it's not very scientific whatsoever. So I actually believe that even though the New York City population fell on paper, it actually increased. But in a place like New York City, uh, how are we continuing to build and build and build and build when the population is declining? And then we're still claiming that we have a housing shortage. Um, but I think that at a certain point, developers and the housing market are going to take a big hit when population and housing needs declines, because I just don't see. I mean, I've always looked at construction of housing as like a
Well, it's going to
limited
shift
thing.
because like you're not going to need to build tons of new houses. You're going to need to like you might like have old houses that get demolished and you build something new on top of it, but you're not going to have this organic demand of expansion that we've seen for like the last century and a
These
half.
housing builders that just build house after house after
Yeah.
house, or apartment
But
complex after apartment complex,
again, I would
that's
say
going to
if
disappear.
if we're to assume that there's a country that truly has a shrinking population, assume no immigration or anything else, and they have a negative birth rate, and the country is shrinking, then you're just going to have like some industries that are going to decrease in size. But the entire country and the economy is decreasing in size as well. So there's going to be outsized impact in one area or another, but it's just something again, adapt or die.
Well, okay, so let's talk about healthcare. Okay, this is really an adapt or die, because you're going to have fewer young people paying into the healthcare system. You're going to have a hell of a lot more elderly people that need caring for. You're going to have a shortage of staff. You're going to have a shortage of providers, shortage of money into that hospital. Um, Healthcare sounds like, obviously not in America where you have to pay for it. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, when you've got like nationalized healthcare, like
Don't worry, America. You're when you got to pay $1,200 to have your teeth cleaned. But in the places where the government pays for your health care, and taxpayers pay for your health care, when you have a lesser, a fewer paying in base, it becomes unsustainable. So, and you have an aging population, so that when the balloon part of the population is the elderly, how does that stay intact? How's it funded?
it doesn't.
It doesn't
Like,
work. It doesn't
well,
work,
it
and
doesn't, but also like
that's why
it,
there's an issue, though. That's why there's an issue.
yeah, but it's also a temporary thing because you're going to have this
Because they'll
one.
die soon? Is that what do you mean? It's a
Yeah,
temporary thing. They're
that's
gonna die
actually
soon?
that's exactly what I
That's
mean,
the
which is like
conspiracy theorist explanation of coronavirus.
no, hear me out on this. Like it's it's not the popular answer and it's a bit grim, but like this whole imbalance in population dynamics is temporary.
Well, also, by the
Eventually,
way, it's always been an imbalance. Like the economy is like capitalism is not a sustainable system. It's
yeah,
like
it's
there's
the
always
whole
an
idea of
imbalance.
infinite growth is unsustainable after a certain period of time. But like if we've got this just kind of, you can look at the population boom post World War II in the United States, the baby boom. Like that generation's going to die out, and then the demographic curve is going to renormalize to a lower level, and it'll suddenly become a lot more sustainable.
And yeah, and as they die, maybe the sunny delight and the frozen TV dinners and all the frozen prepackaged, super processed foods and breads will disappear from the
But
grocery
again,
store
the
too.
issue is that like we've got this massive amount, massive population of old people that we need like a massive population of young people to sustain, and again, I just look at this as like this is the boomer generation, like their entitlement knows no bounds nor depths. Is they got incredibly rich off of an economy that was built entirely for them and
Mhm.
structured for their success. And then when it was time to allow the next generation to succeed, they changed the rules to make it harder for other people to take their wealth. And then as they get older, they bemoan the fact that other generations aren't willing to sacrifice further so that they can continue to have a good quality of life as they age and no longer contribute what little they did before.
All right,
And
under the next
tell me I'm
military.
wrong.
I agree with you. I no, I'm not. I think your point's made. Your point's made. On to the next military. As you run out of 17, 18, 19, 22, 25 year olds, your military is really going to suffer. Obviously, also, war is changing.
Oh, I would say like
War
an
is
easy
changing. You have
solution to
less
that one is just
soldiers and
like,
inventory,
yo,
more drones, right? And
yo,
more.
just stop having wars.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that would be the easy one. I hear I've been like I've had this weird thing lately about like listening to shit about aliens. I don't I don't know why. I don't know what's wrong with me. But I'm like I feel like I just keep searching for like some truth in it, and I just everyone I just find way too much doubt in the stories. But one story I heard recently was like this guy he was on it. He was a pilot from somewhere in Mexico, and he got in the plane, and then he just went like MIA. He just like fell asleep, and he woke up like an hour later, and he was 5 hours away. But somehow they had 5 hours or 4.5 hours of recording of a voice saying, "We're using this guy as a vehicle. Earthlings are the only population that commits war against each other. It's a very primitive race that believes it's well above itself and da da da." But supposedly an alien like talked through this guy for like 4.5 hours, and he woke up a half hour later, 5 hours away. He woke up half hour later, 4.5 hours away. So that was an interesting one. But again, war just being a bad thing. So military readiness. But you could have a country like Russia saying have babies, have babies, have babies, have babies, and then and not just saying have babies, making it easy to have babies, supplementing the population to have babies, economically speaking, and then all of a sudden they have this huge population of 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 25 year olds, etc., that is just ready to go. And the reason I start at 16 is because the war just doesn't happen immediately. You got to continue to to fill the pipeline. What's next, James?
I want to answer another question from one of our viewers. The question is, do you think that having a mixed race or mixed culture can protect the culture of the hosting country? And my answer to that is yes, you can protect the culture of the hosting country because for I my
Culture, yeah.
my argument would be basically saying that if I were to answer no, that would be an affirmation that a country only has a culture if it preserves a certain racial composition within it, which
And
is like
culture
the
and race,
definition of.
yeah, culture and race are different things. Go
Yeah.
ahead. I'll
And
let you
so
finish your
if you're going
sentence.
to say that your race equals your culture, that's racism. So I reject racism. Like I acknowledge it exists, but I reject the idea of it. And so if I'm going to reject the idea of racism,
What do you mean you reject the idea of it?
of like I don't like racism. I think that
Okay.
racism is bad.
When you say you reject it, it sounds like you don't believe it.
No, 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 no.
I,
I reject.
I'm just giving you the opportunity to clear the air
Yeah,
because
yeah, yeah. No, it's I acknowledge that racism exists, but I am against it. And
Yeah.
so if I'm against racism, then I also have to be against the idea that a country can only exist in its culture and such by having a certain racial
Yeah,
composition.
that's like
That is
saying
racism.
that's like saying a black person can't be Swedish, right?
Right.
And you go to Sweden, you're like, oh wow, black people here, they're way more Swedish than I am, or at least that was my experience. Not that I
Or that
went in
like
believing that black
or
people
that
could
you
be
can't be
Swedish, but
American if you're not white.
yeah, exactly, which is also wild. Like,
Right. And so I reject all of those ideas and say you can be part of any country regardless of what race you are. And that means that a country can preserve its culture regardless of the racial composition they're in.
all right, we got two more topics. I don't know if you're following here. I just want to talk about number 16 and 17. As you have fewer young people, you have fewer people entering the education system. You have fewer people innovating because the older people, as you and I know, are resistant to change. We're very happy with the things as they are, right? So
Well,
younger people are the ones that push for change, and with fewer younger people, there's just correlatory going to be
I would say
less
this is an
change.
area where actually like technology and productivity gains that we've seen over the last century are going to finally actually start to pay off in a meaningful way. Is like we can continue this pace of innovation. We don't need a lot of people to innovate. We just need the right people to innovate. So if we do education well and we have people that are willing
Fewer,
to work in
but
fields.
it's a numbers game, James. You could do education really well, but if there's you could do education really well, but if there's fewer people entering education, you're going to have a less. You're just less likely to innovate. It's a
It's not
numbers
really a
game.
numbers game.
It is a numbers game.
No, it's a
How
funding
many
game.
how many Beethovens, how many Mozarts, how many Einsteins, how many Newtons? It's a
If you're
numbers
talking
game.
about outliers in terms of like you
I
need.
am talking about outliers because it's 1 in a million. It's 1 in 10 million.
Yeah, but it
It's,
isn't.
it's actually it's fewer than that. You
It,
just think they need to be educated better?
no. Well, it.
If you
I
educate
mentioned
everybody
no,
better,
no.
you have
I
more
mentioned the
outliers.
term
That doesn't make
outliers.
sense. You educate people better, you have
No,
more
no, no.
outliers. It doesn't make sense.
Did
I'm
you read
curious.
the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell? Who
Uh,
all right.
who you have what a
Basically,
love hate relationship with?
more
I
of a
may
hate
have read it.
relationship,
I like
but
Malcolm Glad.
I
I
think he
like him more
actually
than you do.
makes a couple good points in the book, and one of them is he talks about how like super high IQ, like when you get to like third and fourth and fifth Z scores, where you're talking about like when you get down to people that are at like 200 IQ, where there might be like 5 of them in the world,
Yeah,
and compare them to like 170 or 150 IQ, which is still like really rare, but like there's thousands of them. And he talks about how like once you get above a certain IQ, you don't really see any meaningful progress in terms of what they're able to do. It's and he talks about like LSAT scores and IQs for people becoming lawyers. And he's like, below a certain IQ, people struggle to become lawyers. But once you get above a certain IQ, like the success of somebody that's like 130 versus 140 IQ as a lawyer is basically the same. And the 140 to 150, and the same goes for like science and anything else, is that
yeah,
like
I know that. I
once you
know the
get like
argument.
once you jump the hurdle of whatever IQ, because like for example, if you want to do quantum physics, you need to have a high IQ because there's complicated concepts there. But if you can understand the complicated concepts, it does like additional IQ points above the barrier to entry do very little to value add.
Okay, I agree with you.
And so,
I'm on the same page. We got to move on. We got a lot. We
okay,
got
it's
so
just, but
I,
like the whole thing about like we're not going to innovate as much because we're not going to have like we're going to have a smaller sample size, and these people that are innovators are really small, like small percentage. It's like no, you're still going to have a large enough population to have plenty of highly intelligent people, and if you educate them right, they'll be just as productive.
Since you said quantum physics, I wanted to remind our viewers and our listeners to visit siptalkpodcast.com. If you love quantum mechanics, quantum physics, that'd be a great opportunity for you to exercise your pure and sheer intellect on our bar trivia questions. To answer a bar trivia question, you have a very high probability to win a big prize. We'll send you some Sip Talk merch. We got some pint glasses, we got some towels, t-shirts, hoodies. We got a dog t-shirt on there. And if you're just if you just don't have that sheer mental fortitude to answer the bar trivia, you can just go to the Sip Talk merch store and buy that shit. And when you're at siptalkpodcast.com, you can buy us a drink, you buy us a shot, you buy us a bottle, you can buy us a round. It gets a little costly, but we'll take anything. We'll take the shots, we'll take the pints, anything you want to send our way. You are funding our ability to continue to do this. And on that note, we should just mention some.
Let's talk about some of the solutions that have been proposed.
Hang on, but just I want one more thing to think about is that the more populated nations, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now, could potentially have a lot more power. They're going to have economically, they're going to have more consumers. Economically, they're going to have more producers. Military wise, they're going to have more. And again, we kind of squashed this a little bit earlier, but they're going to have a larger military. And just, that's a force. It's a force to be reckoned with, a huge population. So these countries, like India, Nigeria, countries in Africa, they just because of their role in the world economy could become much bigger superpowers than we would now expect. All right, go ahead.
All right. So we can talk about some of the solutions that have been proposed, and I want to talk about like good ones and bad ones.
Solutions.
Yeah. So how do you raise the birth rate in some of these countries that have negative birth rates? And by negative, I mean below replacement level.
Below replacement. That's easy. So New York City hands out condoms, right? Like there's a lot of, you go to a lot of places in New York City and they just hand out free condoms. You could poke holes in them.
Yeah, that's a bad solution. But like in a more serious way, you can look at like various states restricting or banning abortion.
I was just going to say that's also a bad way.
Well, that's also a bad way.
The states that in this country that have just banned abortion. Yeah. Hey, population decrease, a real thing. We should just ban abortion. That'll solve the problem.
So that's a bad one. Like I think that, again, going back to my hypothesis that people need to have a sense of economic security and optimism for the future. And a lot of people don't have one or both of those right now. And so, like, when it comes to economic security, you see some countries throwing some money towards new parents, but the amount of money that they're throwing towards them is laughably small. When
$1,000, yeah.
Like, so right now in the United States, the child tax credit's $2,000.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you're a new parent, you know what that $2,000 covers?
Not even diapers. Maybe diapers for the year. Probably diapers for the year.
About 1 month of childcare.
Oh yeah, that's 1 month of childcare for me. Yeah,
right.
But that's not counting food, clothing.
No. That's just sending the kid to the childcare for 1 month. The other 11 months you're paid for, and also all the food, medical care, diapers, clothes, you name it.
Oh, medical care, yeah. Come on.
So, like the last time I looked this up, the cost to raise a child in the United States from 0 to 18, the average cost is about $335,000.
So that's 18 years times $2,000, $36,000.
Yeah, so you're off by a factor of 10.
Yeah.
And so, like, you need to do a lot more to support parents, because I'm not saying that the government should cover 100% of costs related to raising a child, but the government covering such a paltry amount, if the government says that it wants people to have more children, then the government needs to put a lot more towards the things that will actually help parents. And a couple of them would be like government subsidized healthcare or childcare, government subsidized healthcare and childcare. And we're like, have government run childcare centers that take, like, because right now to get a government into a child into a government run like school, they got to be like 4 or 5 years old. Expand that down to like 0 or 1 years, and have people pay taxes for it. That's something that benefits all of society. If we're to agree that like the declining birth rate is a problem, then like having government sponsored healthcare is something that benefits everybody.
So I just Googled how much does it cost to give birth in New York City. without health care? And the answer is roughly 20 grand. And I think that's
So
actually on the low end, like without complications or anything.
I was expecting more like 60.
I was thinking like 80. So because the thing is, like, you get a box of tissues in the hospital. All right, that's $112.
Oh yeah. But
It's just
so
wild.
let's just run with the $20,000 figure. So that's just to give birth.
Fair.
That's
Yeah.
not counting any of the stuff that you had to do for the prior 9 months. Because, like, as you know, like, someone who's pregnant has to go to the doctor more than once before they give birth,
Mm-hmm. Of
and
course.
that costs money. And
Mm-hmm.
so, like, if we
Sonograms, like just
all that stuff,
wheeling that sonogram machine out there, it can cost thousands. You got to have a
right?
tech. There's
And
insurance
this is
costs.
assuming that everything goes perfect for the pregnancy, right?
Yeah, we're not
Like,
we haven't gotten too much into solutions. We
no, no,
gotta
no. So the solutions are government needs to start like sponsoring childcare. Government needs to start sponsoring better medical care. The government needs to provide better income replacement for couples that are losing money because they're working less hours. So basically, government sponsored maternity and paternity leave, and
big tax
the
breaks,
education
big
system
tax
needs to
breaks.
be improved greatly, because a lot, like, this goes to the optimism thing, is a lot of people look at our public schools in this country and be like, I don't really want to have a kid because I see what kind of schools they would be going to. So
But
we need to
also,
be putting
but
more money towards schools too.
overall cost of living, housing costs, the fact that
Yeah.
a couple, has to have two full-time jobs just to afford to be able to own a home, and
Yeah.
home ownership is way down. Tells you how how almost impossible it is just to do that. And then if you want to own a child, right?
So
Uh,
you know what I would say is, like, to all these billionaires that are complaining about, like, lack of people having babies, you know what? Let's let them pay for it. Let's start taxing the highest earners in this country more, and put
we
that
used to do
money. And I say this as someone who doesn't want to have kids. None of these policies would change my mind.
All right, let me hit this bar trivia, then we can riff after that. So, bar trivia, episode 280. Shadow squinted into the rising sun as the early morning light reflected off the freshly fallen snow. He headed due east, following snowshoe tracks of Harry, a world famous photographer. Suddenly, to Shadow's horror, he came upon the dead body of Harry. He had been shot and killed by an arrow that entered his back and pierced his heart. Shadow raced back to the chalet where his weekend companions were sitting around the breakfast table. All three men were shocked when Shadow relayed the tragedy. Sam kept muttering that he just couldn't believe it. Sid said that he had just moments ago. He said that it seemed just moments ago that Harry told him he was going out to photograph various birds in the early morning in their early morning habit. Uh, Buck, who was counting his arrows, turned ashen white when he noticed one of them was missing. One of you is the killer, said Shadow. Who did he suspect? Sorry, there's a lot of different names in there. I'm trying to change the names a little bit. Shadow squinted into the early morning sun, reflecting off the freshly fallen snow as he headed due east, following snowshoe tracks of Harry, a world famous photographer. Suddenly, to Shadow's horror, he came upon the dead body of Harry. He had been shot and killed by an arrow that entered his back, piercing his heart. Shadow raced back to the chalet where his weekend companions were sitting around the breakfast table. All three men were shocked when Shadow relayed the tragedy. Sam kept muttering that he couldn't believe it. Sid said just moments ago he saw Harry heading out to photograph various birds in their early morning habit. Buck, who was counting his arrows, turned ashen white when he noticed one of them was missing. One of you is a killer, said Shadow. Who does he suspect and why? All right, we'll answer that at episode 281. I look forward to it. I told you that's a tricky one. A little bit of a wrap your mind around it. Throw some ideas out there. Go with the best one. SipTalk episode 280, bar trivia. What else? We got about 40 seconds left, James. How are we solving this this population decline?
I think I think there's not much to do, because
But
the
you
cost
believe just as I do that it's actually going to happen. You think population is going to take a pretty sharp decline.
in some countries.
I think in most countries, most of the world is developed now.
Yeah,
It's gonna be the small countries in Africa. It's gonna be a decent amount of India. It's gonna be some of Asia. I mean, India's in Asia, but it's gonna be Asia and
even
Africa.
India is seeing this trend now too.
But India is seeing this trend. But it's oh man, we're out of time. Stay tuned next time. Sorry we couldn't solve population decline this time, but really don't put that on our backs. All right. See you next time. Thank you for joining SipTalk. SipTalkPodcast.com. Justin DiGiulio for James Boswell, Raj Kaleb saying adios. New York City real estate agents, it's time to make the move. Keep 100% of your commission. Get access to hands-on agent support and New York City's best agent training, the Slingshot program. Online access to our Agent University and online on-demand video training program. All at DiGiulio. Contact info@DiGiulioGroup.com to make the move.